We're the United States of America. Unity and oneness is what we're made of. One nation under God, it's plain to see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America.
Well, that sounded kind of loud to me. I don't know. I sound loud too, though. I had my headphones set a little louder for the other day for when Dr. Mary was here. And I'm able to hear a little better. And of course, I have a louder voice. This is Bishop Dennis Everson here for Changing Times. Lynn Morris couldn't be here today. He is healing up from some health things. And so he is in our prayers and hoping that he gets some rest. He's used to being so mobile. I'm praying that he's able to settle a little bit and rest a little and heal and just kind of refocus. We're in such amazing times, changing times. What an appropriate name for the show. So many things happening around us, and then so many technical issues. It's so funny. I was at the went to vote the other day, and the machines messed up. They had to reboot the machines before I could vote. And the one lady's like, well, Satan's really after you. And I'm like, yeah, he is. Isn't it funny? It's awesome because I wasn't worried about it. I was prepared for those kind of attacks. And then we were at the office filling out all the paperwork for a retirement for an individual that is in my life. And sure enough, halfway through, or almost to the end, actually, of entering a bunch of data in the computer, it just all disappeared. And the poor lady that's been doing this for decades is like, well, this never happens. You know, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, you get used to it. The enemy's able to mess around with technology some. I've been telling people that for years, and I think people are starting to figure it out. But he's not going to stop anything. And we've learned what he's doing, and so we just keep moving on. So I've got this episode of Changing Times that I'm wanting to share. It's a special one that I got when Dr. Mary was first coming on Lynn's show as a guest. And now she's going to be helping as a co-host. And what a wonderful addition to the team. And I just really enjoy being able to help her share the information that she has that God's laid on her heart. And, you know, as she was sharing the other day, you know, God put her in the position of sharing these things that are so crucial to returning America back to what it can be, what it once was, what it's supposed to be, what it was founded on. Of course, primarily it's going to take his people. But I won't start preaching. I do have the show here for you. Gotta make sure I get it queued up. And so without further ado, so this is on the founding of America, America's independence. We filmed it last July and just really focusing on why independence? What were we wanting? What were those founders wanting? What were they doing? What was the focus? What was the purpose? And then, you know, a challenge at the end on what we can do. And don't worry, there is a little glitch in this. That's one of the funny things. I edited out yesterday, rendered it, got it all ready, put it on the flash drive. And when I put it on the flash drive, I put the wrong file on the flash drive. I put the original, not the edited one. So there is a little glitch in the middle. So just rejoice in that, you know, it's the enemy's attack, and keep listening. Don't let him win the victory.
Show, I tell you, get out a pencil, get out a pad of paper, because there's going to be things that we say, and especially Dr. Mary Byrne, our guest, people are saying that you need to actually take notes of. Very important information today. And even when we talk about our sponsors, be sure and write those down. And if you live anywhere around Southwest Missouri, you want to make sure that you check out our sponsors. Okay. So I'm Lynn Morris, and this is Dr. Mary Byrne. I tell you what, Mary, you've been on several times, but you haven't been on for a while. And I tell you what, this will be a treat. You know, everybody celebrated Independence Day yesterday, Mary.
Mhm.
And you know, I looked around my pool yesterday because I had all my 6 grandkids. I had my 3 children. I had their spouses. I had some other friends. You know, a lot of food, a lot of fun and stuff like that. But I was just wondering how many people out there really know why we were celebrating. It's been 247 years ago, 247 years since we got our independence. And so Dr. Mary Burns, she is a tremendous historian as well as other things that she specializes in. And we're going to talk today about going to start out with the American Revolution,
We are.
how we got our freedom. And you know, a lot of people have even forgotten how we did that. And then we're going to go into some other issues. I think you divide our show up into 4 parts. And then towards the end, as always, we try to have something positive, and we're going to tell you what Americans need to do today to make sure, you know, in 3 years, it'll be 250 years.
That's right.
And so think about it, people out there, 250 years. No countries lived that long and celebrated that long of an existence. What do you think our country will be like in 3 more years?
Well, it depends on what we do.
That's right. And so pay attention, because I think that's really, really important. So, Doctor, I'm just going to go ahead and let you start off. We'll get a little history about the American Revolution.
Well, the document I really wanted to
Okay.
focus on was the Declaration of Independence, which,
Okay, perfect.
which
perfect.
you know, actually there was a 10-year lead up to the Declaration, 10 years of our founders and leaders trying to talk to the king and Parliament in particular and say, you know, you're treating us, because they were British citizens,
Mm-hmm.
and they had no plans really to become independent of that king, but they didn't want to be treated like second-class British citizens. And so for 10 years, they tried to communicate and tell Parliament that you're treating us differently than you treat your citizens there in England. We're loyal to you, but we have no representation in Parliament. And frankly, it was an abuse of trade that was part of the problem. But the other part was, since Plymouth Colony, since Plymouth Plantation, there developed what Thomas Jefferson called the American mind, right? So in the South, the colonists that came over from England were very loyal to the king and still respected him not only as the king of England, but the head of the church. And the Puritans, on the other hand, said, yeah, we're loyal to the king, but we have no king but Jesus with regard to our religious beliefs. Read the Bible.
Yeah.
And that was the essence of the rebellion. Read the Bible, and you'll find out there was no succession of kings by birthright.
Right.
It was when David became the king after Saul, it became clear, once the citizens of England could read the Bible because of the Gutenberg press and so on, it became clear to them that God was sovereign, and that men who were put in positions of government were there not as representatives, but as of God, but as people who were respected and selected from the Israelites to become their governors, enforcing the law handed down by God. And so I refer to Moses not as the lawgiver, but as the AG.
Okay.
God actually wrote those laws, right?
Yeah.
And Moses was then to present these laws to the people and become the enforcer, you know, not in terms of police, but he was the judge. And so that model is actually in the book of Exodus 18 to 23. And that's what the Puritans were reading, saying, and when they wrote the Mayflower Compact, it was a social compact saying, look, we're all equal here. There is no sovereign other than God. And we either band together, believers and unbelievers, and survive for the general welfare of all here, or we're going to perish. Okay. But they did not negotiate their religious beliefs. And so that became the setting up of civil government and the church. And the whole point of separation of church and state was so that the government could not interfere on the religious beliefs. It wasn't to silence the church. It was to say the government can't interfere. It was to say that we have no king who is also head of the church. And so they were far enough away across the pond from England that everybody pretty much let them go what they were going to do. And that developed what Jefferson called the American mind. And so with the Declaration of Independence, recall it's not a declaration of war. It was saying, look, our ideas, after 10 years of discussion, our ideas are too far apart. We have to declare our independence from what we can't possibly support. That is no representation of our needs in your government. And so Jefferson wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was just anathema to the king, because he's like, well, no,
right.
I'm the designated
He's
head
the
here,
top
right?
guy. Yeah.
But according to the Bible, God is sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so that was the first biblical idea in the Declaration that you have to accept. And so all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator. There it is, a recognition of God as sovereign. Okay.
Right.
And now he doesn't call him any particular name. He just refers to this sovereign Lord as a creator.
Right.
And that is, that's an acknowledgement that you had the Judeo-Christian values there, and they did not recognize Jesus. But the Old Testament is the underpinning of much of what we know about government in God's understanding of what's best for men. Men meaning human, not just men and women.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So they're endowed by their creator with unalienable rights. That's another key. If they come from God, there is no human government that can take these rights away from you. And that is life, liberty. Don't forget, they're working off this idea, the Exodus, that God freed people in order that they could be free to worship him. So they were freed from a pagan government under Pharaoh, where they were slaves. It wasn't just about economic slavery. They were immersed in a pagan government where there were false gods, and Pharaoh considered himself God, right? And so the King of England was like one step away from that. Well, I'm not God, but I'm his representative. Mm-hmm. And Jefferson was laying out there, no, this God gives us the right to life, liberty, meaning freedom from that tyranny of a man at the head of government, and the pursuit of happiness. This comes from John Locke's ideas, where John Locke talked about property. And don't forget, that's what God gave the Hebrews when they became Israelites. He gave them instruction on how to parcel out the land, that each family had their own property. Right. Think about Marxism now. You will not own property. Think about what Klaus Schwab is saying now. You'll own nothing and like it. That's exactly the opposite of what God promises us, in that we'll have a kind of personal economic security by our own work, our own labor, to be able to support ourselves. When the government takes all of that away, they can control you utterly and completely. And God says, no, you're not going to have any human government control you. I'm your sovereign. I'm your provider, and I will provide for you from the land. So this idea of pursuit of happiness was to encompass the idea of property, but also that you would realize your own gifts according to your creator's distribution of those gifts to you, and that you could pursue the cultivation of that, not just for your own benefit, but for the community. But it was always being in right relationship with God. So to pursue happiness meant you had the freedom to fail, but also to succeed. And so, Jefferson is making it very clear none of this comes from what's happening now in our country, a database system to determine what your skills are so we can plug you into the right slot.
Right.
I mean, that's what's going on here with the schools. That is completely the opposite of the Declaration of Independence. So while it is not the Constitution, it is the preface to the Constitution. And there is implicit and explicit in that declaration the idea that our relationship, each individual's relationship to a sovereign, is that relationship to God. He says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So government is not to be your provider for equity of material wealth. Your government is there to protect what God has given you. And that's the encroachment that's happening now from Washington, D.C. The infiltration, and you asked me, so where did this all go wrong? First, I want to ensure that everybody understands what I just told you in terms of Exodus being the model, the book of Exodus being the model for setting up our government system of local control, which would have been the families and the local communities. And then you go to tribe, and then you go up to a higher level of judicial decision making, which was Moses. Right. So you have this 3-tiered system, not for centralized control over the economy, but for ensuring that the laws were justly decided and enforced. All right. So when Benjamin Franklin was on a committee to submit proposals for our Great Seal, which currently we have is the bald eagle with the arrows and, the olive branch. That was not Franklin's idea. Franklin and his co-workers had submitted a symbol that was the Exodus out of Egypt.
Oh.
All right. And so Pharaoh was waiting on one side of the Red Sea wearing the crown of King George. And on the other side were the free Israelites. And in the center was the pillar that was God. And so regardless of what kind of character Franklin was, what this demonstrates is that everybody knew the biblical worldview. Everybody knew that our freedom from the king was paralleled to the freedom of the Israelites from the Pharaoh. And Jefferson, who is often referred to as a deist, had a very similar proposal. So regardless of what the personal views of these men were, the concepts that were underlying their work and the documents that they were writing was the book of Exodus.
Mary, so their beliefs has built, they built a foundation, the Declaration of Independence. They built a foundation so strong that today, although people have tried to tear down our foundation and our beliefs and values, it's still there.
That's right.
And they may be making a few little cracks in it, but honestly, if they hadn't had those beliefs back then, 247 years ago, it wouldn't be what we are today.
So Samuel Adams, when the Revolutionary War was over, Samuel Adams said, "And now the sovereign is restored." And what he was talking about was the setup of the government as described in the book of Exodus with God as sovereign. And of course, it unravels in the Old Testament, right? That's when they start the king. That's when Saul comes in. But when Samuel was discussing with God this request of the Hebrews to have a king, Samuel was feeling dejected. And God said, "They're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me." And so when we had a government that didn't have a monarch because all men were equal, and so we had a system of checks and balances put in place in the Constitution, which, by the way, was the idea of James Madison when he wrote the Constitution, but he was under the tutelage of John Witherspoon, who was a Presbyterian reverend pastor, invited by John Rush to come over and become the president of what was then the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton University. So the point is, the idea of our structure of government was modified but adapted from the Presbyterian polity that was set up that said we have no king who is over the church. We will respect the spirit and and that's where it came from.
Right.
So the whole idea of the concepts underlining our Declaration of Independence and then in our Constitution were actually coming from this theologic perspective that there's darkness in the hearts of men and they need to have this system of checks and balances, but most of all, they need to understand that they're ultimately responsible for what they do in this world by who controls this world and the next. And that's what we've lost.
Yeah.
And so what was happening after the Civil War is this infiltration into the church, where we were the seminarians of all faiths. I'm not picking on any particular denomination. They were infiltrated in all denominations to adapt this idea of social justice rather than the biblical world justice. Jesus had said to his disciples as he was leaving, he said, what business is it of yours what I say or do to this other disciple, right? Well, what we have now is somebody saying it's everybody's business. We have to have equity. Everybody has to have the same. Mm-hmm. And what Jesus was saying is, no, I distribute as I see fit. And so there's a real lack of respect for God as sovereign, and this taking over of the government as sovereign. The churches allowed them to do that because they were no longer preaching the scriptures. They were talking more of this Marxist idea of equity and social justice. That was by design. Somebody infiltrated, somebody orchestrated, but the problem is the people who were the true believers in the scripture rolled over.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Kind of like education. You've talked about it before. That's slow,
Yes.
insidious. People weren't paying any attention.
Mm-hmm.
The infiltration of our education system
Permeation.
started out actually with our universities,
Exactly.
our higher education. Now it's down in the very early preschool.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all the way through our system today.
Yes, and that is the design. I actually wrote a series of articles that is published in Online Education Reporter. It starts with the April edition. That was a special edition, so all of the articles in there are something I wrote to explain how it was the British Fabian Society. So here we are. We declared independence from Great Britain, but by the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, you have this cooperation of our elites, the financial elites, Rockefeller and Carnegie, with the education elites, the John Deweys of the world, cooperating with the Fabian Society in Great Britain to bring this English socialism back into our country. And I say coming back into the country because, they tried that in Plymouth Colony. They tried a socialist community, and it failed so miserably they were starving. And so William Bradford said, we abandoned that. We gave everybody their own parcel of land. We told them, you fend for yourselves, and whatever bumper crop you get, you can sell. And that began the first free market,
Mm-hmm.
right? So England never really got over that damage. They wanted this idea of a global socialist / communist society, because that Fabian Society was hobnobbing with Eleanor Marx, Karl Marx's daughter. So Marxist ideas were brought in there. But yeah, John Dewey was at Columbia University, but he established another school there in New York called the Rand School for Social Research. And that's what brought the German Frankfurt School over from Germany in World War II. And they're Marxists. The Frankfurt School was basically a group of Marxist professors who were trying to figure out a way to have revolution without just Marx's idea was the economic proletariat and bourgeois. No, there's got to be another way to have a revolution, because that's what you need, is the conflict to make society rebel. And they really had no plans for building it back up. They just needed to make it rebel. And so it was that school, the Rand School, that housed the Frankfurt professors. And from there, they permeated into the university system here in this country. And they permeated the churches.
Well, I tell you what, now don't lose your train of thought.
Okay.
We've got to take a break here just very quickly. Do not go away. We'll be right back, but with more interesting information. But I tell you what, we do have 3 sponsors, and we want to make sure that we give them recognition. Brad Pistow is our first sponsor. He's a certified fiduciary financial planner in Ozark, Missouri. Or you say, well, I don't live in Ozark. I don't even know where Ozark, Missouri. He's licensed in 3 states. He has friends and associates in 47 other states. I actually use him for all my retirement planning. Lots of people do. Don Blackard's family does. There's just people all over the country. He's a contributor to USA Today, many interesting retirement articles. He has 2 books he's written. Safe Money Matters is his first one, and Bulletproof is his second one, last December. If you call 417-581 9222, 417-581 9222, they'll send you copies of the book. They'll give you free information. It doesn't cost for a consultation. His consultations are free, and he'll set you up with retirement planning that you will never run out of money. Okay. Look at inflation. Look at what's going on. Look at the stock market today. As I was driving to the studio, heard that stock market was down to 180 points at opening this morning. Don't know what it's going to do at the end of the day, but we know what the stock market has done, and they're still predicting a recession. So if a recession comes, the stock market's going to crash even more, and a lot of people are going to lose all their retirement planning. And every day that life goes on, I've never lost a penny since I put money in with Brad Pistow. So my wife and I are secure with our financial planning, and you can be too. Our second sponsor is Youngblood Motor Group, and they are located in Springfield, Missouri. They sell Nissan and Kias, and on South Campbell, they sell new cars on one side, they sell used cars on the other. But it's not just used cars. Most of those cars are certified cars, and that means that they've gone through a many point check system to where when you drive off the road, they're not just going to fall apart with a lot more mechanical expenses and things like that. So a lot of people can't afford to buy a new car. I understand it. I always look for a used car with low mileage. And so that's where you go. You can buy used cars that are certified cars and program cars that are actually really a good buy for the money. And John Youngblood, I think, and John Whittaker. I think John Whittaker is going to be here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We always have our sponsors on, and he's going to tell us all about electric cars, hybrid cars, gas cars. What are we going to do? And where you buy or sell or lease or whatever you do, he's going to tell you all that stuff. So we're glad that he's a sponsor of ours. Our third sponsor, Louis Michael, he's also a sponsor and a co-host. And I think Louis will be back here next week. I understand he's out of town this week with his lovely wife. And I tell you, he is a realtor for the firm, FIRM, down in Ozark, Missouri. And so if you want to buy a house or sell a house, he's the guy to contact. He does farms. He does all kinds of things around Southwest Missouri. He even sells property in Vegas, Nashville, things like that. He has many contacts because he's an Elvis impersonator. He's actually one of the best in the world. And he has a nonprofit called Choosing to Live that he just loves more than selling real estate. He tries to put money back in to his nonprofit for people to choose life over death. And he comes and talks to schools and businesses, individuals, anybody that can listen. He wants to tell them to choose life over death because he had a gun to his head. He knows what it's like. He was just 1 second away of dying, and God saved his life, talked to him, told him what he was going to be doing. And so, 3 great sponsors, still got room for another sponsor or 2, but we're glad to have our sponsors. And so there we go. So we're going to go ahead and start. We got to keep moving.
Yeah, well, talking about those progressives in the universities, one in particular I wanted to bring to your attention was named Charles Beard. And Charles Beard was the one who wrote a book called The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. So when you read the Declaration, you know that look at where taxation without representation fits on the list of grievances, because it's way down there, like number 14. The grievances really were spiritual, and part of this idea of self-governance rather than they were free citizens, not subjects, right? So Charles Beard then, influenced by the Fabian socialists in Great Britain, because he was over there to study for a little while, wrote this book and reinterpreted the Constitution, saying that it was, get this, a lot of white men who are property owners who wrote the government structure to protect their own property interests. And I just explained to you, that was not it at all.
No.
Okay. But he was actually debunked in the early 1900s. But then what rose up, again, these Marxists are infiltrating the universities. What rose up was what was called New Left historians. And they resurrected Charles Beard's writing and said, yes, this is what's wrong with America, is that it was the bourgeois and the proletariat. Okay.
Right.
So that's what is in our classrooms today.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than teaching the facts from, and that's why I showed you this picture, we have the primary source documents. We have the writings of the founders who participated in the meetings of the constitutional conventions and the notes. We have Jefferson's autobiography, but that's not what's getting taught in the classrooms. So if you want to reverse this, one of the things we have to do is start reversing the way history is taught, reject what the New Left did. One of the main writers of the New Left historians was Howard Zinn, who wrote a people's history of the United States. He wrote that in 1980. It is still in classrooms today. It's still being distributed, and here's how they do it. You get sponsors, private sponsors, to buy caseloads of these books and donate them to the classrooms, which means the school board never sees it in the budget. Okay, but that's how they get this messaging infiltrated into the classrooms. And you've got teachers introduced to the Zen Education Project, which is free lesson plans online available to teachers. But the teacher candidates are being introduced to this as a resource for them to develop their instruction in the classroom in their teacher education programs, which the state is funding. Okay, but as legislators, you're not told what the syllabus of the professors are or how they're instructing those teacher candidates. But then that's what the teacher candidates, who then become licensed teachers, thinks is normal and what they're supposed to do. But if you look at that book, the People's History of the United States, there's no citations. There is a bibliography at the back of the book, which is not a reference list. Okay, it's a bibliography. And there are very rabid leftist extremist resources used. Howard Zinn said, it's not my business to report history, it's to create history, which is his Marxist worldview.
Right.
Okay. And that's what's getting into our classrooms. The Black Lives Matter curriculum is in the classrooms. The 1619 Project. Nicole Hannah-Jones will say the same things. It's not my business to teach history because she's a journalist. She's not a historian. That material, the 1619 Project, has been criticized by real historians. But we have nothing in terms of our state requirements for what's taught in the classrooms. And it is the state's business, not the federal government's. We have no requirements saying, but you will teach from primary sources or reference citations, materials with reference citations, so that it's a free-for-all. And that's how you get this false ideas taught in the classroom at taxpayer expense. So that's something that can be changed in education. But most of all, I think pastors have to appreciate that the King George referred to the American Revolution as the Presbyterian Revolution because the pastors were the ones teaching liberty from the Old Testament and saying this is what God's intention for us to live was.
So the pastors could still do that today.
Absolutely. And
I mean, it's not too late
it's
yet.
not. As a matter of fact, what they have to do though is throw off the chains of social justice and start teaching biblical justice as it is in the scriptures.
And I think, some of the pastors are beginning to do that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. But that is the revolution of ideas that started our American Revolution in the first place. It was a revolution of ideas, and the ideas came from the Bible. And so maybe not directly from the Bible. Jefferson was reading John Locke, but when you go to John Locke, he was an English theoretician for politics. When you read John Locke, he's footnoting the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this cultivation of ideas over time, about 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
that finally, when it was in Jefferson's hands, he said, this is the American mind. Regardless of what his personal views were,
Mm-hmm.
this is the American mind, and this is what we're going to put in our documents. We're not teaching that. We're teaching activist civics, okay? And that's a Marxist idea, that what you do is you foment this idea of inequality to incite revolution, and then you'll get change.
I think Mary, I hope the viewers are paying attention. I mean, I think anytime that you start to think about creating history, man creating history, obviously that's a flaw. That's a weakness. History is something to be studied, and you study past history to learn how to operate better and live better in the future. So history is really important. When you start changing history, that's very dangerous because you have no foundation then. You have no real anchor to hold on to.
Well, and the founders were adamant. That's what education was for. One of the core subjects to be taught in public schools, because public schools are financed by taxpayer dollars to preserve the republic, believe it or not. It is not for workforce development. That was a Marxist idea that got introduced really with the U.S. Department of Education. The point is, this idea that education is for the economy is Marxist. What the founders said was education is to preserve the republic, to equip free citizens to govern themselves and to make good decisions about who they're going to elect. Okay, we're not teaching that anymore. Even the Missouri Constitution says the legislature is authorized to provide a free education to preserve the rights and liberties of the people. That's not workforce development. Pursuit of happiness is embedded in that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really entrepreneurship in the pursuit of happiness. You're an entrepreneur, right? That was the idea, but not that you would be hijacked by corporations who would convert education into a human resource development department. And that's exactly what Mark Tucker wrote to Hillary Clinton. And the Clinton administration was all about the transformation of education to workforce development. So that's where we went wrong. They were really good. And don't forget, I keep going back to this Fabian socialist stuff. Bill Clinton was working with Tony Blair in England when Blair was the prime minister and Clinton was president. Tony Blair was a card-carrying Fabian socialist who wrote pamphlets for the organization. He's the one who wrote The Third Way, and The Third Way is what Bill Clinton was parading around the world talking about. But the third way is the socialist way, completely abandoning the concepts of our Declaration of Independence from England and the concepts of our Constitution.
You know, and I hope that people out there are thinking about this. I mean, think about all the countries are either socialist countries or communistic countries. How's that working for those countries?
Yeah. How's it working for England?
How's that really working? Because honestly, even with all the flaws and cracks we have in our country today, we're still so much better off. We are the best in the world, and people do need to wake up. So what can people do? What do we need to be thinking about today?
Yes. Well, I would go back to the Presbyterian Revolution, and say, pastors, when you assume the pulpit, assume the responsibility for freeing your people so that they could worship God in freedom. We've just had great Supreme Court decisions, but you can't rely on, the Supreme Court to create your whole culture. That's what the church was for, was to create the culture that we would live in. You have to get back to that. I think as citizens, because this corruption of education has been going on for 100 years, you're going to have to take deliberate steps to educate yourself about what America was designed to be, and how we can get back to those roots. So one of the resources I recommend, hopefully you'll have internet, is the Providence Foundation. The Providence Foundation website is providencefoundation.com. All kinds of reading resources, DVDs, podcasts available to learn the biblical founding ideas of our country. Another one, in our Conservative Americas Club, we have an ongoing program called Biblical Citizenship for Modern America. This is an 8 DVD set series available from Patriot Academy that any church could buy, any club or organization could purchase, very reasonably cost. And they have manuals for leading discussions that you see in these DVDs. So as a club, the Conservative Americas Club this year is presenting each month a different DVD out of that series. And we have really enjoyed that.
And they are good. They really are good. So I highly recommend that.
The movie Monumental is available at monumentalmovie.com. That takes you back to our Plymouth colony roots, understanding what created the American mind in the Mayflower Compact. And I highly recommend a DVD. We also saw this last year at our Conservative Americas Club, called Enemies Within the Church. And that's available at enemieswithinthechurch.com. I say that so that people understand it is not a single denomination. It was a progressive idea, really a Marxist idea, that we take over the seminaries and start educating our pastors in the way of thinking of a utopian society on earth. Well, that's leaving God out as sovereign. Right. So I recommend those resources to educate yourself. And then last but not least, once you're educated, recruit from within those people you trust and know will begin restoring our government the way it was designed to be. Recruit them, support them, work for their campaigns, and get out there and vote for them. And then don't abandon them. Once they're in office, this. Right. Once they're in office, you have to continue to support them by giving them the evidence that their constituents want good legislation. In other words, send emails and letters and show up at hearings and support their bills that they write for you. If you don't, then you're going to have the lobbyists do that for the corporations, and it'll be a society run by corporations rather than the voters. So it's all doable. It's not comfortable, But that's what every citizen, is supposed to be educated to do, is to defend their own personal liberty by becoming engaged citizens. And that's what the public schools need to return to. So it's not hopeless, but you will have to roll up your sleeves and work.
Well, Mary, so let me ask you this. So we're going to run out of time, but I want to kind of think about this and get your idea. So we have more people every year homeschooling.
Yes.
And I'm proud of that. I'm glad they are. I have a lot of friends, especially younger people that I run around with that are tremendous citizens of our country. They're homeschool. And most of the homeschool kids today, they haven't been indoctrinated like that, right?
Right.
You hope that their parents are really teaching them the real history. You have to know the real history for you to really go forward and prevent from making mistakes. I mean, when you repeat things over and over again, shame on you. And that's why you have to know real history. And so thank goodness we have, and I'm still a supporter of public schools. I mean, you're public schools,
right. But the turnaround time for this is too long. The kids are growing up now. And so I always have that two-prong approach, right? You have to educate the children now while they're growing, but at the same time, you have to preserve what was supposed to be the institution to preserve the republic. And that is take back local control. All right. And basically get on your school boards, go to your school board meetings, right? And those school boards are going to have to stand in the gap because the state departments of ed have already sold out to Washington, D.C. Those school boards are going to have to stand in the gap and say, sorry, I'm a separate political entity. And if you're doing something that is, and they are, I know for a fact, if the state board is requiring something in your accreditation standards that is not in line with the statutes for what public schools are for, then you have to talk back to them and say no.
Right.
And that's your job. That's the resistance movement. And that's what Franklin wrote on his Great Seal. Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. So don't expect someone else to do it for you. It is your duty as a believer to be salt and light in this world. And that is, salt is a disinfectant as well as a flavor enhancer. So get out there and be the disinfectant.
Mary, I tell you what, I appreciate you being here today. You're a difference maker. We always look for difference makers, Don and I look. And then Don always says, being the change. You are certainly been the change and being the change. And, you know, as I sat there yesterday and I sat around and I was trying to find shade, a lot of our family was in the pool and stuff like that. I looked at my grandkids. They ranged the age of between 14 and 20 and 6 of them. And I was just thinking to myself, I knew the show we were going to do today. So I was thinking about that. And I wonder what my grandkids really think. Because some of them have graduated, 3 of them have graduated from high school. They're going to be in college. Some are in college. And I'm thinking, what do they really think about our country? What have they been taught? Because I don't think they've necessarily been taught what I was taught. And so it does worry me. But thank you for watching and listening today. We've got viewers all over the country and the world, and we really appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to Elon Musk, Mary, because he keeps sending emails to Jim Whining, our CEO. He watches our show. He likes our show. And we appreciate Elon Musk for buying Twitter and
giving us independence.
Yeah, giving us independence because he took off the girdle. And where people can watch our show. We're going to have another great show next week, and we'll be back. And you all have the rest of a great week.
Thank you for joining us for Changing Times today. I found an image of the seal that Dr. Mary was talking about, and so I thought I'd throw that up on the background. I don't know if you saw the technical issue in the middle was right at the time she was talking about the importance of that surrender to the Spirit and the sovereignty of God. And again, the enemy likes to mess with technology, and he uses technology to reach into people's homes and destroy lives. Acts Media Group's founding and purpose is to help reach into homes and save lives, to bring hope to that troubled soul, to go in and bring truth. Things like changing times and that information, going back to the foundation. So important to go back to history. We're working on a number of different history programs. We did one not too long ago with Jeff Nelson on the history of Charles Parham that led to William Seymour and Azusa Street. So much history there with revival, all the things that are happening in the world today. But we need help. I noticed when I was going to put this episode of Changing Times on the website, which we need help with the website, lots of tech areas we need help with. We have individuals that are able to share good quality information, but we need help on the tech side with distribution, with making a website that's usable and engaging for people, that they can find help and hope. Also opportunities to share creatively with radio drama in so many different areas. But get a hold of me and we'll talk. We have a lot of opportunities, and we're not going to let the enemy win with his little tech issues that come up. We are learning how to defeat those demons, and stay tuned also for Jared with Night Church, and he's got the special focus this week. I know there's some of the individuals are fasting, praying for those specific things. Look into that, and make sure you tune in next week for Changing Times. It looked different today because, after all, we are in changing times. So they just keep changing. And then, I don't know. It was supposed to